Point number 11, one that responds in obedience by sacrificing sleep during times when God asks them to join with Him in His work. A servant's heart trusts that God will give him or her the strength to carry out the future activities of the day ahead which God has planned for them. Once again, sometimes this means that God wakes us up at night to get up and to pray for another person. We saw all those examples in the Old Testament or in the New Testament of how that happened. But the greatest example, of course, was Jesus. How Jesus Himself, and it's just the opposite of what we would think, that Jesus, instead of getting a good night's sleep and being refreshed and ready for the cross, stayed up and He prayed. He prayed for us, and He prayed and He prepared. Sometimes that it's not only praying, sometimes that God calls us in this servant's heart to get up and do something. The old, I'll meet you at 2 o'clock in the morning if I know you're coming. Having that attitude in our lives. Once again, we saw that reflected in Luke chapter 5. How God was asking Peter to launch out into the deep. To launch out. Even though he had been up all night working the night shifts, fishing. How Jesus, when Jesus calls, Jesus has that door of opportunity that He wants us to walk through, many times with great blessings. And so we need to respond in obedience with the servant's heart. And once again, there are times when we don't have any answers for why we can't sleep. We saw all the physicians. We've looked for all the answers. We've said all our prayers, and still silence from heaven. We're reminded of that passage in Job of all of the things that he had to suffer through, and how Job's experience with sleeplessness and the pain and the suffering, but yet how he was able to endure and have that enduring heart. And that leads us to surrender point number 12. In times of chronic sleeplessness, one can endure victoriously by understanding that trials bring us into a deeper experience of God. God doesn't always give the explanations, but He does promise a deepened relationship. Once again, understanding, as Dr. DeBakey would always say, that only God knows that. And having that as answer enough. Sometimes we ask the wrong questions. Sometimes we ask why when we should ask God, how do you want me to respond to this? What do you want me to do? What are you doing in my life? Once again, C.S. Lewis said this, if I find in myself a desire which no experience in this world can satisfy, the most probable explanation is that I was made for another world. And once again, we see in Job, in 19, he says, for I know that my Redeemer lives, and He shall stand at last on the earth. And after my skin is destroyed, this I know, that in my flesh I shall see God, whom I shall see for myself, and my eyes shall behold, and not one another. How my heart yearns within me. And that brings us to surrender point number 13. This idea, this truth, this principle of heaven, that living with the hope of heaven transforms our sleep issues. We live in the expectation of deliverance and the eternal enjoyment of God.